This is Austin at SSP Fabrication. Today we're going to be building a move bumper for a 2001 Dodge Ram 1500. Should be pretty basic. It's the heavy duty bumper with the winch plate. We built a few of these before. They're really good quality. We'll get started.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities.
Looks like this is the 1.5-inch bull bar bumper kit with the off-road upgrade. It's definitely thicker. This is 1/4 inch here. Looks like the sides might be 3/16. That's about 1 inch thick. I don't know if you can tell on camera, but it's a beefy bumper. I think it's gonna look really good.
I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched.
So it looks like we've got a pinch plate for the outside of the frame here. So these are the bumper brackets. We're gonna get these loosely bolted on each side so we can tack it up and get it all square. All right, so we're looking at the frame mount detail here. I've never built one of these move bumpers with the outer pinch plate. It looks like it just pinches this bracket and this bracket to the frame for strength. On this bracket here, on other bumpers in the past, I like to push it as far back as it can and keep it square. When we put this piece on here, because you want everything square before you tack it up. This is kind of just a rough mock-up here. Obviously, we'll make sure this is perfectly square between each bracket. We'll make sure each of these bolts are nice and tight before we go ahead and put our first tack on this bumper. You just want to make sure everything's nice and straight and uniform before you start tacking it up, because it'll cause problems once you get to these outer pieces here. Because if you have say an 1/8 inch off on one side, the bumper will look twisted, and you can adjust it a small amount. But you definitely want to avoid too much, because as this is either going to be hitting the body here or it's going to be sagging, you can't do nothing about it because there's only so much adjustment. So you want to get it as square as you can on mock-up. Now, when we mock this up, and we can double check it once it's on before we tack it, we get these lines on the outside of each of these brackets, and this should be pretty centered. And as we go, we'll make sure that we don't have any problems. We'll make sure it's centered up, and if it is, we'll get it tacked on. Okay, so we got the center section tacked up. We have it centered up between each outer bracket. We have the second part of this outer wing tacked up. I like to tack where it's not going to interfere with the weld. Am I tacking the reliefs? I'm going to do the same thing on these outer wings, but as you can see, we're hitting the bottom of the headlight housing here. So before we go any further, I'd like to readjust this bumper to where it's perfectly flat and level underneath the headlight housing, the grille, and so we don't interfere with this part of the fender. All right, so we got the bumper moved. We tilted it back a little bit, so now we're not interfering with the headlight housing or the fender. We're gonna tack these on and make adjustments as necessary. We contacted the customer and he wants the bull bar to be flush with the front of the bumper so it doesn't get in his way. So what we're going to do here is we're going to use a pipe master 1.5" tubing tool, which has reliefs for your center line. So when we go ahead and slide this up where it needs to be, we can follow that center line and trace out the angle that we need for this miter. We're using some scrap. It's very straight. We have it clamped to the front of the bumper, so we ensure that the front of this bull bar is perfectly lined up with the front of this bumper like the customer wished. So we'll get these marked up, we'll get them cut out, and we'll get this tacked on. I think it's finally time to retire. All right, we're about to weld this thing out. We're gonna make sure to get all these reliefs. We're gonna go back and forth one side to the other so we don't warp it. We're gonna be using a Miller Matic 215 today. You can stick, MIG, and scratch start TIG with this machine. It's great for this kind of project. If you're planning on getting one of these bumpers and doing it yourself, you might want to invest in one of those. It's been a great machine. We're gonna get to welding. I missed. All right, last night we got the bumper welded out on the outside. The inside, I just did all the joints, so it's extra strong. We went to install this winch this morning. We ran into a couple problems with this control box. The instructions show 2 different ways where this plate can be mounted. I personally like this way better. We tried both. Both times this control box interfered. It used to be mounted right on top of the winch. This is the winch the customer would like to use. He had it already. No sense in buying a new one. This one works good. This way, the top of this control box hit the underneath of this bumper, which wasn't a super big deal other than it limits the use of this remote port here, plug. So that wasn't gonna work. We mounted it the other way, which puts this control box facing backwards. When you put that winch plate facing backwards, it hits this AC condenser when the bumper is mocked up. So that wasn't gonna work. We got over to the customer and said he found a relocation kit for this control box. So he's gonna go ahead and get that control box relocation kit on the way. In the meantime, we're gonna get this winch the way it is mounted to the plate. We're gonna mock it up, make sure it clears everything, make sure when it is functioning it's gonna work well, and then we'll get that plate welded in. After we get that plate welded in, these are the lights the customer brought. He plans on buying some rigid lights, but for the meantime, for mock-up, we're gonna use these cubes here for these ports. These are the little bottom plates that kind of directs the light out of these ports. So we have to get these in, we'll get the lights mounted up. After we get the lights done, we need to bevel these. I'm going to mount these directly in front of where the bumper mounts to the frame, which is the bracket that's directly behind this. You can see by the heat mark from the weld. They're a good recovery point, we want them to be strong. If we put them here, I'm afraid that if it ever gets pulled hard, it's gonna warp the bumper or bend it or anything. This prevents it. It pulls nice and linear with the frame. In the meantime, we plan on having this done by now. We had 2 customers come in. A local construction company brought in some aluminum square tubing. He needed extended to 36 inches and welded to some 1/4 inch plate. And a thermostat housing for a local auto shop. Both of those were aluminum. They were TIG welded. We got them done, and we're onto the bumper now, finally. bumper is mounted, the bolts are tight. We got the lights mocked up. The winch is tight. Recovery points are welded on. We got everything welded up. As you can see, the spacing between the fender, headlight, grill, it all looks super nice. It matches on each side. This bumper turned out super good. We threw a coat of flat black Rust-Oleum on it. The customer stated he is going to either send this off to be powder coated or line it, but for the meantime we don't want it to rust. Next project is going to be this 4Runner outside. I'm unsure of the bumper. It's going to also be a moved bumper though. We have the bumper over here, and that'll be the next video. Thanks.